Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome on behalf of the Lucknow Military Lit Fest. Some of us might have had the perception of Ukraine fatigue, especially when viewed through the prism of media and common man who desperately wants to know आखिर कब तक this destruction and misery to human beings would last. We sincerely hope and pray that peace prevails in Ukraine and misery of people gets over soon. But perhaps the West would know, or Russians themselves, till they become akhand, a fluid state of affairs, isn't it? In such circumstances, it is pertinent to see and critically analyze all related aspects of this war, whether it is for territorial gains, control over vast natural resources, agrarian yield, and so on. Still, there are some different aspects which are relevant and are playing their parts in the ongoing conflict. Today's discussion, Ukraine, different strokes, focuses on these aspects by three experts who, with their creditable analysis on global situations, have carved a niche for themselves. Moderator of this discussion is Major General Harsh Kakkar. Before I request General Harsh to take on few words about him, although he hardly needs any introduction, a well-established and prolific writer on international and regional issues related to geopolitics, security, and defense. General Harsh Kakkar is a gunner and served for long 36 years in every part of the country and has wide experience while holding various assignments. He has been the head of department strategic studies at the College of Defense Management, where he wrote extensively on futuristic planning and enhancing joint operations. He also served as part of UN peacekeeping at Mozambique, and he was the first Indian Army officer to have attended the National Security Studies course at Canadian Forces College, Toronto. He has published his articles in 3 volumes, each covering different periods. I now request General Harsha to take on, please.
Thank you, sir. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, sir. For those of us who watched the documentary Winter on Fire, covering the Ukrainian uprising of 2013-14, will recollect that St. Michael's Cathedral in Kiev rang all their bells to alert the sleeping city to the ongoing violence in the main square. The last time all church bells had been rung simultaneously was in 1240, when the Mongols were attacking. Quoting the Euromaidan press, the bells rang incessantly from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. on 11 December 2013, urging people to go to the main square of the capital and support the protesters who were being threatened by Yanukovych's security forces. Kiev's Mishalovik monastery opened its gate and became a refuge for protesters whenever they were chased by the police. With the ringing of the bells, the church became a symbol of the uprising. The Russian invasion has divided the Orthodox Church, which exists in both Russia and Ukraine. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, has justified the war in Moscow. while it has been condemned by the Ukrainian Orthodox churches, as also by some priests in Russia. The Russian Orthodox Church is the primary church in Russia, while there are two Orthodox churches in Ukraine. The Ukraine Orthodox Church is part of the Russian Orthodox Church. To brief us on the role of the church and on the conflict, we have amongst us Sanjay Kapoor, who runs Hard News and is an expert on the subject. Memorials honoring soldiers have always been a motivation for common folks. Honoring war heroes of the past inspire those currently involved in battle. It also motivates the common youth to pick the gun for his nation. This is also the scenario in the Russo-Ukraine crisis. In central Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, there is an alley of the heavenly 100 heroes. This honors ordinary people killed during the uprising of 2014. Those honored range from the ages of 16 to 83 and come from all walks of life. The memorial was established to recognize civil courage, patriotism, uphold principles of democracy and human rights. In 2015, the Soviet-era Defenders of the Fatherland Day was replaced by the Day of the Defenders. This holiday was created to honor veterans and fallen members of the armed forces. Its slogan is Strength of the Unborn. All Soviet-era monuments have been erased to reflect Ukrainian identity. It is this that Zelensky is exploiting to boost the will of the Ukrainians to fight a much stronger Russia. In Russia, simultaneously, new monuments are being constructed to honor their soldiers battling in Ukraine. Many of them do not honor individual soldiers, but the war itself. In the rest of erstwhile USSR, Russian monuments are being defaced or removed, conveying their protest to the invasion. For many of us, memorials imply respecting those who laid down their lives, but they're also a motivation. For discussing this subject, we have amongst us Major General H.K. Singh, the brain behind the Lucknow Military Lit Fest. The Ukraine war has been ongoing for over 8 months, with no end in sight. Objectives planned by Russia and termination objectives acceptable to Ukraine are nowhere close to being achieved. Both nations are losers. Russia economically, diplomatically, as also in deterioration of its military capability and efficacy of its equipment. Ukraine is facing devastation of its infrastructure and battling based on Western support. General Mud is already on the scene and General Winter is closing in fast. While Mud will impact the battlefield, Winter could impact way beyond. I will come on this later to discuss these aspects. Let us move towards the role of the church. A few words of introduction of Sanjay Kapoor. Sanjay is the editor, author, and foreign affairs commentator of Hard News magazine, which he established in 2013, I think. He's worked with the Blitz, where he exposed the Jane Hawala scandal, Asia Week, where he wrote on defense, information technology, politics, and strategic issues. He's also written for Hong Kong's South China Morning Post and Singapore Today. He's been the editor of Midday and advisor to Star News. I correct myself, he started Hard News in 2003 in partnership with Le Monde Diplomatique. He is a guest speaker to multiple educational institutions, including JNU and TV networks. Over to you, Sanjay. Sanjay, you're mute.
Yes. Thank you so much for your very generous introduction and giving me an opportunity to come here and share my views on the ongoing war. It is actually getting very tiring to be following the Ukraine war because it doesn't improve, it's getting worse with every passing day, with new threats which are woven into it. Now this talk of a dirty bomb which has been brought in. Before that, there was something else. And we also saw the pipeline being blown up in very extraordinary circumstances. Yesterday, you had drones being used for blowing up the ships. So, in a certain way, the 8 months is giving an opportunity for the army, for civilian technology, as well as defense, to test themselves in trying circumstances. So, in a certain way, a lot is forgotten about how it all started, what may be the reason. So, it is always good to revisit some of the major issues which could have started off this war, which has provided ample justification for both sides to carry on like this, and also many countries which are giving support in terms of weapon systems, armor, and you can say funds to Ukraine to carry on this uneven war. The first time I have been following the Ukraine war from the very early days. In fact, I have spoken also quite a bit on various international channels. But in terms of the depth and the involvement of the church came to me most strikingly when I went to the European country of Cyprus, which is a small island country in Mediterranean. And that is also, follows the Greek orthodoxy. I went to a tiny little island near in Cyprus called Portoras, and that is where a lot of things began to come together. I returned from Cyprus and I wrote something for a Bangalore-based publication called Deccan Herald. I will read out that tiny little piece, and then I will tell you what I think of the role of the church in. Just give me a moment. I've been struggling with the lighting and everything for the last, never happens with me. In Cyprus's Mediterranean resort of Portoras, there is a tiny strip of land that juts into the tranquil blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Here stands a rock with a plaque that endeavors to locate the relationship between the people of Russia and Cyprus in its shared history and the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the US and EU sanctions against Russia for invading Ukraine are threatening to undo this age-old relationship, which is written in stone and wrapped in complex religious history that is casting its long shadow on today's conflict. While not many visit this desolate place, constantly slapped by the waves of the sea and at times submerged by the high tide, the implications emanating from the plaque on the strategically located rock are quite dramatic and help in understanding the war in Europe from a perspective that has not got much traction. Titled as symbol of eternal friendship and religious history of Russia and Cyprus, the legend reads as follows. On October 15, 2011, it was appointed an honorary cross just 350 meters from here at a depth of 15 meters in memory of all the mariners. The Russian sailing ship running up the waves carried the cross. The ship successfully performed the Christian Orthodox campaign, which began in Germany and traveled to 13 countries before reaching its destination here. So, the purpose of recounting this little trip to Portoras and to read the plaque was to show that there is an attempt. This happened in 2011, so there was an attempt to mobilize the Christian Orthodox in a coalition of sorts, which may or may not have proved very productive because you had a war and there was certain division which was being played out in the Christian Orthodoxy also. But the fact of the matter is there is a bloc which disagreed entirely with how the West conducted itself. Before we move further, I think it would be better that we delve a bit on how the religion began to play out in this war. On March 6, 2022, about 10 days after the war, the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, in his sermon, Patriarch Kirill, depicted the war in starkly spiritual terms. We have entered into a struggle that has not a physical but a metaphysical significance. He portrayed the war as a struggle for eternal salvation for ethnic Russians. President Putin also chipped in with his own version. In his long speech after the invasion, he alluded to the religious narratives and underpinning the battle surrounding Ukrainian national identity. Putin claimed that Ukraine is an inalienable part of its own history, culture, and spiritual space. Putin's claim reflects a commonly held interpretation of the history of Orthodox Christianity in Russia. This is a quote from an article which was written by in USIP, United States Institute of Peace. According to this view, Russians and Ukrainians are one people who originate from the same Christian kingdom that came into being in the 10th century. According to the national histories of both countries, Prince Volodymyr of Kiev accepted Christianity in 988 and established a devout kingdom that became the predecessor to the modern states of Ukraine and Russia. Moscow, we must recognize, was perceived as the third Rome after the Great Schism separated the West and the East. The schism is located at the Constantinople, today's Istanbul, named after the Roman Empire. If you were a Roman Emperor Constantine, the fall of Constantinople, the capital of Byzantine, to the Muslim Ottomans, was never forgotten or forgiven. So I'm just going to take a pause here to help you visit the geography of this region. If you look at the war which is unfolding at the moment, the country which has probably benefited the most because of its geography is Turkey. And Turkey nestles Istanbul, which is earlier was known as the Constantinople. So much of the religious conflict is driven largely by where countries and societies are located, and they seem to survive many things as they do now. Coming back to my prepared text, Ukraine's Orthodox Church disagreed with the narrative of the Russian Church or its patriarch and began to assert. This is subsequent in the last, after you can say the conflict began in 2014 between Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine lost its territory, Crimea, to Russians. Ukraine's Orthodox Church disagreed with the narrative of the Russian Church or its patriarch and began to assert its independence. In 2014, after the Russian-backed Ukrainian president was chased out after a protest choreographed by US official Victoria Nuland, the Patriarch Filaret of Kiev Orthodoxy wanted to be liberated by the Russian Orthodox Church and to be declared autocephaly, which means independent. The Russian Orthodox Church excommunicated Patriarch Filaret, who set up an independent Orthodox Church and began to elicit the support of parishes. The Russian Orthodox Patriarch retaliated and began to gain control of his own supporters in the eastern part of the country, where there was a preponderance of the ethnic Russians. So if you look at how it is all being played out, the Russian Orthodox Church managed to retrieve about 11,000 parishes as its own, whereas the independent Ukrainian Church managed to get 7,000. The bulk of these these parishes where the support was there on the eastern side, which has been now taken over by the Russians and being, in a certain way annexed and taken control by the Russian state. So this is how it has played out. You have the Ukrainian Independent Orthodox Church, which remains outside the area which is under the control of the Russians, and the Russians have their own. As the war progressed, nationalism began to weigh heavily on the religious loyalty, with many of those parishes in Ukraine who were with the Russian Orthodox Church moving towards their own independent church. So the sum total of speaking about how this division began to show up and happen is also an attempt to establish that it is in history that we recognize that there is a certain level of Russophobia which exists there, and Russian phobia has been detailed quite a bit. If you Google and try to establish what is the reasons of Russophobia, you will find thousands of maybe more links to various websites, why the Russians are hated by the Germans, why the Russians are hated by the Britishers and the Americans, and you name it, and there are different reasons for it. And one of the reasons that is most compelling, as to allow me to repeat, is the fact that there is a division in religion and religious history of Russia, which has been a inheritor of the Eastern Orthodoxy, which happened after Constantinople was overrun by the Ottomans, in the 14th century. And that division has, in a certain way, made one section of the Christian Orthodoxy deeply upset with how the Roman Catholics gave way and allowed those Muslims to take over in the form of the Ottomans. And time and again, this issue gets buried, but shows up whenever there is a crisis of sort. And this time again, you have those kind of voices which are coming up again. There has been considerable work which has been done in the area of to understand the reasons behind Islamophobia, of Russophobia, and religion is one of them. There is a gentleman in Russia who, in Switzerland, who has written a book on, it's a huge tome, which has been written by a gentleman in Switzerland. He was formerly a journalist, like many bright people, and he then subsequently became the head of the parliament. He wrote about thousand-year war between the West and Russia, and I'll read out the name of the book as we go along. But that is something which is very seminal, and if you have been watching Russia Today, you would find a lot of references that keep coming from Mr. Kemet. Kemet is the name of the gentleman. Mr. Kemet's work on Russophobia, and they have been done in a manner which makes this continuing war extremely credible. And the role of the church is at the center of this entire huge tome which has been put together. I think this is what I would like to say. If there's any questions, then I can talk about it.
Thank you, Sanjay. We'll come to the questions at the end. Moving on to memorials, I would now call upon Major General H.K. Singh, also the force behind the Military Lit Fest. Major General Hemant Kumar Singh served in the army from 1973 to 2013. He was project director of the Arunachal Martyrs Memorial from 2014 to 19. His design with Ajay Sethi was the runner-up in the National War Memorial Global Design Competition in 2016, which had over 420 entries by renowned architects. His design was the winner in the Regimental War Memorial Design Competition. He has also participated in similar competitions for the Native American Museum in Washington. As a research fellow with the USI, holding the Maharana Pratap Chair, his dissertation submitted in 2020 was on an untouched subject of remembrance, memorialization, commemoration, and war memorials in post-independence India and neighboring countries. General HK, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Harsha, and thank you, Sanjay, for the discourse. Somewhere the memorials are also connected with the church. We saw the Twin Towers falling in Noida, and we know how much hype was created. And what you saw just now happened in Latvia just about 2 months back. Sometime in June, Latvia Parliament got together and introduced a law which said that any object related to glorification of the Soviets or the Nazis is forbidden to be displayed. I could agree that they were talking about Soviets, but why club Nazis with them? Because Nazi anyway does not exist anymore in form of memorials. It is only the Holocaust memorials which exist. Now, wars are being played on many fronts and in many geographical areas. especially the Ukraine war spans from USA right up to the Russia and from Finland right up to the Australia, while the actual battle may be taking place in Ukraine. And similarly, the memorial scene, where all this is happening in all these countries, and they are trying to uh, uh, put a particular discourse through the politics of the memorials. Ukraine and the surrounding places have seen wars, occupation, destruction, resurgence, changing borders, and whatnot for almost 1,000 years from the times of Genghis Khan. Uh, this is such a place where so much of upheaval takes place. That is why the place in Ukraine is called the place of memorials. There's so many memorials in Ukraine of different times. Now, memorials are powerful symbols. They carry political, community, and cultural overtones. Visuals and materiality make their impact more pronounced. Around memorial, discourses can be built up, interpretation subjected to debate, and meaning making can be changed. They have a lot to do with identity and the politics of today. Stories built around the memorials can influence people. Coming back to India, you see the memorial politics which happened in Bhima Koregaon. It was a memorial made by the Britishers for particular units which fought very well. They were homogeneous units and of people coming from all over India. But later on, about 100 years later, around 1926, Shri Ambedkar visited the place, and thereafter it sort of became the glorification point or the rallying point for the Mahars, who were till then treated as the second citizens in Maharashtra. And as we move forward, we saw around 2017-18, you find the left and certain other elements coming and taking over Bhima Koregaon, and there were huge crowds running into lakhs, and there was politics built around it, there were stories built around it, and finally it had to be quelled. Similarly, when you go to Chhatri, which was a symbol of the Raj, and once the king's statue was removed, thereafter, for a long time, there was a controversy whether Gandhi's statue should be put there. And then it remained vacant, and now great Subhash Chandra Bose is there. Somehow in India, the National War Memorial was never allowed to come up. It was only in 2019 that it got inaugurated. And we still do not have an official memorial for IPKF. The government still is hesitant about, paying the proper commemoration. And if you go to the National Memorial lawns, one of them was actually the August Kranti Park. Further, coming to a general point, soldiers' memorials are generally not destroyed. And that is where the India Gate, it seems, has survived because it pays homage to the all the Indian soldiers which were lost in World War I.
Indo-Afghan War.
Now, coming to the Ukraine war or Ukraine affairs, there is a lot of heightened activity which has been built around the memorial, which is happening for last 30 years, which picked up after the Orange Revolution. And thereafter, after Euromaidan, it sort of peaked. But last 3-4 months, you seeing that very heightened activity taking place on the memorial front in terms of either demolition or destruction or refurbishing or changing of the memorials. So this is a very significant change which is happening at the cultural level, which is also influencing people. Now, Poland, as back 2 days back, they demolished 4 memorials. Similarly, Latvia, Lithuania have also demolished memorials for last 3-4 months. The ripples are felt as far away as the Western Europe, USA, Canada, UK, Australia, Nigeria, and Australia, which are somewhere involved in this memorial politics in one way or the other. Much of this at times appears to be a well thought out and coordinated campaign, which has been built on anti-Russia and anti-Putin feeling. Orange Revolution and Euromaidan definitely did speed up on this front. But the history of Ukraine nationalism is very old. In the early modern times, we can go back to 1700, when Ivan Mazepa was at that time ruling the Poltava region. He was a Cossack. He enjoyed a considerable power and ruled Cossack Hementante for 20 years, which was under the Russians, and he was with the Tsars. He was loyal. But at some stage, because of this powerful place in Ukraine, he developed a vision of independent kingdom, which now is called Ukraine. And for that, he signed a treaty with the Swedish, which led to the war, which ultimately Russians won. And this chapter was closed. And in Poltava, which is actually in the center of Ukraine, around which a lot of memorial and other activities happen, has the memorial of the Tsar. That Tsar sat here and had a cup of tea, or such memorials which go to the Soviet times. Now, race to the front to come around Orange Revolution and Euromaidan, you found that there was a huge built-up by the young people, new parties supported by the OUN, that we must get rid of the Soviet symbols. So in Poltava, after a lot of bargaining and a lot of discussions, they decided to remove the Lenin's memorial. And after about 2 years in 2016, the memorial of Ivan Mazeta has been put up there. Now, Mazeta is now the new symbol of nationalism of Ukraine. They say we have nothing to do with Soviets, nothing to do with Russians. But there is a other side of it. There was a survey carried out by the Harvard University, which said that 42% of the people in Ukraine were in favor of such activities like demolition or removal of memorial, while 39% were against it. And similar is the situation in Poland, in Latvia, in Lithuania, and the neighboring countries. So you can see that there is a divide, which is especially more towards the eastern side of Ukraine. So it is, there is an attempt that more and more people should be motivated to get to the idea that Russian symbols and Soviet symbols must be removed. And as part of the policy of the government, they should look westwards. So through memorials, it is happening. And you see when the memorials are demolished, first young people come, OUN guys come, and they put the ropes. So it is not that one crane comes and does the demolition, which happened lately actually, because those were big memorials. But youth is involved and all that is picturized and it moves around in social media. Then people think, okay, one more symbol has gone, one more symbol has gone. So there is a organized a way of doing it. It has picked up in last 3-4 months. That is where all these new laws have been passed. Now, at the same time, the Russians are looking at the memorial. Before the war in 2020 and 2021, Firstly, the Rezev Memorial was constructed in Belarus. It is a huge memorial, beautiful. So, just like the typical Soviet or Russian memorial, majestic, beautifully designed. And that is where, with the president of Belarus, they got together, Putin and him, and they announced that we are together and we are into it. And they were stressing on bonding and motivating the soldiers and things like that, anticipating possibly the war which is going to happen. And then same thing happened in the Sevastopol in the Crimea, where the memorial was refurbished, and similar kind of discourses were done by the President Putin. So with that, we will come to the next part, because there are certain other things where a lot of memorial related activities taking place, like Babi Yar Memorial, Holodomor Memorial, and things like that. I will talk about them a bit later, but memorial being an important thing, because a most important thing about memorial is the visuals and materiality. So let us have a look at some of the photographs. This is Babin Yar, where 30,000 were buried. A synagogue at the Babi Yar Memorial. Babi Yar Memorial. The new museum which is coming up. This is the Babi Yar Memorial in Washington. This is the Holodomor. This is Mariupol. This is where the Holodomor memorials have come up. The silence, when the truth is replaced by silence, the silence is the sin. Eugenie Yuvashenko. We'll start with Mr. Jones. Barrett Jones was writing on the Ukraine famine in 1930s. He was a Welsh person, and thereafter a book was written on him in around 2000, and his articles were published in USA. From 1980 onwards, this famine has been very extensively covered in Ukraine as well as in Russia and many Western countries. So this book, which was written on Mr. Jones, which was about the unclean hands. So it got converted into a film in 2020 by Hollywood. And the person who produced it had his lineage from Ukraine. Incidentally, Ukraine has about 20% population over the last 30 years, which has migrated. So there are a huge number of Ukrainian diaspora in Canada, UK, USA, Europe, and Australia. So they are also a driving force. So this movie was made. Now, it was being shown in the NGO called Memorial in Moscow. And this is a very hard-hitting movie because it is telling in 1933, the Stalin-sponsored famine was being shown with the protagonist eating the flesh, while actually there is no proof of it that there was a cannibalization, such kind of things during the famine of 1932-33. And it is shown that he's eating the bark. So these things were highly objectionable, and while it was being shown, the Russians nationalists moved in and they ensured this movie is stopped. And thereafter somebody filed a case and it went up to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has banned this organization called the Memorial. More about it, you can read it. So this is about Mr. Jones. So, and the event now called the Holodomor. You saw the Holodomor Memorial, which have come up all over Ukraine. Mostly they have come up after 2003 in an organized manner. Then they have come up in Washington. Then they have come up in many cities in USA, Canada. And in Canada and UK and USA, it is also supported by the church. So whenever there is a ceremony, you can see it. This is how it is happening. So Holodomor, they say 3 to 10 million people died. And the reason given is earlier it was called natural calamity because it also happened in Kazakhstan. It also happened in the Black Earth area of the Russia, which is nearby. So why single out only Ukraine that Stalin was responsible for it? But he was definitely responsible to a great extent by enhancing this natural tragedy and with so many killings. And thereafter, there was no discourse on this subject, except the writings of Gareth Jones and one or two more writers. Then it is opened up and rallying around this subject, which is still disputed in terms of number of casualties and other things, but it is now being used as a hatred towards the Russian. And a big sentiment is organized around this. So because now it is in every city and every village of Ukraine, wherever Ukrainians have been able to build this small memorial, which is signified by that girl. Then coming to the Babin Yar. Babin Yar is a ravine near Kiev, where 33,000 Jews were killed and pushed in and buried later on. And later on, Russian prisoners of war were utilized to sort of remove any traces. Thereafter, Babin Yar also went into oblivion till the time Eugeny Yushchenko wrote the great poem in 1961. He said, anti-Semitism attitude of Russia is not allowing remembrance of Babin Yar, which is very important, in which the Jews died, Russian soldiers died, Ukraine nationals died, and many others who were buried there. Similar thing happened in Odessa, similar thing happened in Kharkiv. So issue was, Russians are saying, or Russian-supported President of Ukraine in a slightly earlier time was saying that this Jewish killing, the OUN or the Ukraine nationalists supported the Germans. So there is a dichotomy. And that is why you see the neo-Nazi issue coming up. It is being played through the memorial. And later on, this great poem called Babi Yar was converted into the 13th symphony of Shostakovich, which is played around all over the world. And last time it was played around was in the Babi Yar Memorial itself. So these are the two aspects which I wanted to highlight. There is so much one can talk about, but time is less, so I will not talk about it. And this new destruction which is taking place over the last few months, and Russia is trying to repair the memorials which are damaged. And there is a Russian rage that why are you doing it, you know? So the battle of hatred is built around and during the battle of a change. So with that, I come to the end. I would only say that this cultural aspect has been a very much part of the Ukraine affair or the Ukraine war, in which there are many actors involved. And therefore, it is a muddy war, I would say. Thank you so much. If I exceeded my time, my apologies. I would request now Sanjay to take it forward and ask our expert on Ukraine, Harsha Kakkar.
Thank you so much, General Singh, HK Singh, for this very illuminating presentation on the memorial. It was really, really riveting in certain ways. The interesting part is that what we are discussing doesn't really show up in the mainstream press. And so most of the people are in a certain way, blank, or they don't really know this aspect. They just see the war and the fog of war and nothing else. Now we will go to the other part of the program, which pertains to looking at how the war is going to play out when the snow starts falling and everything gets frozen. So this is a period where some discussion is visible on the European media, because they are all preparing for it, both in terms of how their oil and gas supplies are going to come. Germany seems to be well prepared. They have filled up their reserves. Other countries aren't very sure. They don't know how it's going to play out. The other aspect, which is not really getting too much traction, is what happens to the weaponry. Will the war come to a standstill at the time when there are 4 to 5 feet of snow and people are not able to move around? Very extremely Siberian conditions are going to come in, and whether this will also give an opportunity for arms manufacturers to look at new generation of weapons which will be used in this phase of war, because what we've seen is that old weapons have really been found very, very suspect. You have more drones coming in. Drones are being used. Far more tanks have come to grief. So similarly, we are very keen to figure out from General Saab how the next few months is going to look like. Is it just going to be snow and nothing else, or we should expect more? Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. 8 months plus, and there's no sign of abating for the war. Neither side has achieved its objectives, nor will they. Russia, there's been no regime change, nor has Kyiv been taken, nor are talks commencing. Ukraine has not regained the territory that it claims it will prior to any talks, nor has it compelled, along with the support of the US and its European allies, to get Kremlin to withdraw. It is a stalemate. Russia currently appears to be willing to scale down its objectives and agree to stay with what it holds. It is open for talks, but Zelensky is unrelenting. He insists on recapture of territories, including Crimea, which frankly, in my opinion, is well beyond their means. He has the backing of the West. Istanbul talks would have succeeded, but were called off under pressure of Boris Johnson and US. With Zelensky having signed a decree prohibiting talks with Putin, nothing else is going to move. Russia sent a firm message to Europe that the war will only be fought on Ukrainian soil. The message has been conveyed. Macron clarified it when he said they're arming Kyiv to challenge Russia, not invade it. Therefore, what's going to happen will be only damage to Ukraine and nothing else. The threat of the nuclear war continues. Unlikely. Russia would face global isolation in case it even thinks so. It could set a global precedence. Very, very unlikely. Costs have been high on both sides. Russia has been impacted by sanctions. Military production hit due to import blocks. It is running short of chips. Its crucial missile production has been impacted. It has largely consumed its stocks of missiles. And in the last firing of missiles, it even used anti-ship missiles on land targets. It's had high casualties. Official figures remain unknown. Western media talks of 100,000. I wouldn't go with it. Partial mobilization implies largely untrained troops on the front. As far as Ukraine is concerned, its infrastructure is destroyed. It's dependent on largesse of the West. It's got limitations of manpower. Once its current offensives are stalled, it is unlikely to have trained forces to launch fresh offensives. 40% of its electricity power generating plants are destroyed. Will support continue to Ukraine in the face of defeat or failure to push the Russians back? Will support flow for rebuilding the devastated country? We have to remember, when the US talks of aid in terms of weapons, it is not going to be free. It will have to be repaid in some time frame. The support that it gave to Europe or to UK for the Second World War was repaid over a period of time. Will European support flow even in winters when the European economy faces crisis due to rising costs of gas and public pressure? There is no doubt that Russia is no longer the threat to Europe that it once was. It is weakened militarily and economically. It will be quite some time before it can recreate forces capable of challenging NATO. This implies that European nations can breathe easy and at the same time reconsider that support to Ukraine. Ukraine fought for Europe. It fought to protect Europe. It was a proxy war of Europe and US. Now it is in turmoil. Who's going to stand by it? Coming to the weather, we're all aware of General Winter, which impacted earlier campaigns against Russia, whether it was Napoleon or Hitler. Currently, the slush season is on, also called General Mud or Rasputitsa, which is thick, deep, sticky, frigid mud. Movement cross-country is slow. Heavy equipment movement severely restricted. Offensive operations hampered. Kremlin is counting on this pause, the pause caused by General Mud, to make good its devastating losses and regain combat power. Ukraine does not want to lose the momentum. Currently, the way it appears, conditions may benefit the Russian defensive strategy and employment of its air power. As winter comes closer, the scenario may come down to an artillery battle with guns shooting and scooting to avoid counter bombardment. Logistic supplies will be impacted for both. Russian troops are therefore currently digging in, preparing for winters. The second mud season comes post-winters when the ice thaws in February, March. The coming winter could be bad. It could again be a reminder of what happened to Hitler in 41-42, with temperatures cold enough to freeze the mud. Can Kyiv's forces fight through the wet and dry cold winter and maintain their hard-won battlefield advantage and carry it forward to the spring? It appears difficult, but yes, is within the realm of possibility because for them it is home ground. Ultimately, it's going to be careful planning, robust logistics, expert engineering, and incredible grit from the frontline troops which will determine the future. Ukraine will attempt to keep its offensive ground ongoing, while Russians are going to tire the Ukrainians from their defensive positions. The Russians are already using the winter as a weapon, hurting Ukraine by denying it its basic necessities to survive, including power plants. This is the new Russian strategy under General Sergei Surovikin. It includes destruction of infrastructure, forcing migration, increased civilian casualties, impacting morale, and enhancing pressure on Zelensky to sue for peace. There is much more to come. Can Ukraine manage to repair its infrastructure to prevent its population from freezing? Will Zelensky come under pressure to seek peace in case the situation becomes unbearable for the Ukrainian civilian population? The WHO has already warned too many people in Ukraine are living precariously, moving from location to location, living in substandard structures or without access to heating. This could lead to major problems of frostbite, hypothermia, pneumonia, and heart disease. Does the Ukraine forces possess enough winter protection for their soldiers? The West has already promised winter gear. The US has announced sending 50,000 parkas, trousers, 39,000 fleece hats, boots, gloves, and tents. But will it be sufficient? Will Europe continue to fund the war it's been doing now, despite huge economic cost due to soaring gas prices? The European Union unity doesn't appear to be the way it was when the war began. Will governments remain stable as inflation rises? Italy already has a new government, which may not accept EU or US diktat, while Macron in France has already lost his majority in parliament. Will internal pressures compel European nations to change strategy and seek an end to the conflict? Will the European unity remain? Answers to these questions will flow over the next 2 months. That is the period which will decide which way the wind will blow. On the battlefront, for the troops that are deployed, it is a battle of will, logistics, and morale. Which side can do better will depend on which side can provide for its soldiers. An example is very clear of the Russian invasion of Finland in 39-40. The Finns were better prepared. Russia suffered 10 times the Finns' casualties, though finally Finland capitulated. The future is not going to be easy to predict. A lot can change in the coming days. We need to watch and wait. I end here, and I'll now look at the questions that are coming in.
Okay, I will take on the questions.
Okay.
I'll start from the end by Raj Gopal Thampi. Can General Kakkar please opine what are the two top scenarios under which war could end?
The two top scenarios under which war could end. The first could be a split in the EU and lack of support. Second is further destruction of infrastructure, especially with winters coming in, could actually lead to pressure on Zelensky to relent and agree to talks and accept the fact, which is what even the world is now thinking. The only option is to accept the fact that what Russia has now will remain. It's not going to come back. That is something, once that term and condition is accepted, that is the only way things will come back and peace could be restored.
We can, even Sanjay can throw some light on it. The fact remains that for Russians, Ukraine has always been part of it. And for them to lose out to Mazeta in 1709, and after 400 years, he reappears. So maybe Sanjay can throw some more highlight. How will it end?
This is a question which has been talked about practically at every forum which is discussing how the war will end. But the most fundamental question which has to be figured out, what are the end objectives of this war? Of US, for example, which is everybody agrees this is a war not between Ukraine and Russia, but between Russia and US, because they are the ones who are putting in all the weapon system, putting the kind of extraordinary funding which was not even available. The sanctions that the US has imposed on Russia started unfolding within a week of the war. They, in a matter of a week or 10 days, Russia was totally eliminated from the international financial system. Now, they in between this last 8 months, the nature of war changed because they supplied multi-barrel guns, HIMARS, which were so potent and so productive that they started hitting the T-90s and other weapons that Russia was unleashing on Ukraine. So in a certain way, what are the end objective of US, we have to ask, and that end objective, which has been repeated, you find them showing up in certain conversation, is that they want to diminish Russia to the extent that it is incapable of waging a war for the next few years. They think that if they continue the war for some more time, depleted financially, depleted militarily, they could get hurt. But on the flip side is that Russia has made almost $1 billion per day since the war began, primarily because there was such a shortage of oil and gas in Europe, and they were selling everything at a fairly high price that they could get away with it. So if the end objective is to diminish Russia, it will carry on for far longer. The other objective, as pointed out by General Kakkar, is that if Russia is able to wall up Ukraine to the extent that they are compelled to come to the negotiating table, then it could happen. But I'm not really sure about the Europe splitting up, because there is a disconnect between the leadership of Europe and the people on the street. They are agitating at the moment. You find big protests taking place in Czech Republic or France and even Germany for that matter. But most of the governments are sold out on that because they think there is a, if Russia gets diminished, there is some picking which will probably come sooner than later. Like, for instance, Germany is looking at building up a coalition of East European countries. And that is why when you had a conversation between Germany and France recently, the French were most disgusted with how the Germans were conducting themselves. They call them disloyal to the European Union. So there are wheels within wheels with the whole thing. It is not going to come very easy. It will extract a big price, but let's see how it plays out.
So there are certain, I would say, questions, only comments. One is, will Putin go for nuclear option to finish the war? We will skip it. It's a big subject by itself. This is from Alok Mathur. And there is a comment from Anaya. Unfortunately, Ukrainians are being used by the West and the US as a cannon fodder and may be devastated. This is what Harsha was also highlighting. I think it's a very carefully planned affair by the USA. There is a comment from SL. I don't know who the person is, but it is saying, listening about various memorials being torn down, the incident of Gandhi's statue being removed from one of the universities in Accra, Ghana, comes to mind. A widely respected person for his non-violent struggle against the imperial forces can be hated by some for his racist remark shows that every figure, a human or in stone, can have varied perspective around it. Memorials similarly evoke different emotions, as pointed out by H.K. Singh in case of Bhima Koregaon or Ukrainian memorials. In that manner, memorials reflect the prevalent mood of the majority at that particular time of the history. Their study can be interesting and relevant historical resources of the political period. Now, there is a remark, it's a battle of hatred. It looks like that. Then there is a remark, religion has been invoked to further political aims throughout the history by several states. But do we have an example where a state has been able to keep religion and political affairs separate? It's a long question. It will have a big debate. And there is a question by comment by CA Anaya. IPKF memorial has been done by Sri Lanka, but not done by our own country in India. The soldiers were treated rather shabbily at Madras and now Chennai on return from Pavan. One has sometimes wondered if it was worth losing lives for an ungrateful nation. Quite demoralizing. And Colonel Rana is asking H.K. Singh if he can tell us something about the memorials in China. We will have a separate topic, but right now I can only say China is quite organized when it goes to memorial, and their war memorials as well as the other memorials are very well organized and respected, and they pay due attention of it. We also saw recently one of the Galwan person was part of the 20th Congress, and he was played up. So now, with that, we come to the end. We'll request General Harsha to kindly sum up today's discussion, and thereafter request Brigadier BN for the vote of thanks and to tell us about the next session.
The most interesting part of today was we've touched on topics, especially in terms of the role of the church, the memorials, aspects which we do not discuss on a regular basis as far as Ukraine is being concerned. We've discussed the war, we've discussed the strategy, we've discussed everything else. And frankly, these are the two aspects which have influenced the war rather indirectly. Sanjay very rightly brought out the correlation between churches, between the Russian and the Ukrainian Orthodox churches, the impact that they would have. And I was actually left wondering towards the end, Sanjay, whether the Orthodox churches, the leaders of the Orthodox churches, can actually try and push a peace agreement between the two sides. Because you have them there, they have a power over the people, and they possibly would also be able to influence the leaders. So are they in a position, should that have been a better option rather than the UN looking at involving the Pope, the UN Secretary General and PM Modi, as suggested by the Mexican ambassador to the UN in his talk to the UN General Assembly. Similarly, when we come across memorials, we see a lot of them. And we have them in every city. For us who've been in service, you have them in old battalions. But frankly, the impact of the memorials, the way they influence the nature of the state, the way they influence the mindset of the public is something we've come across today. I think it's been, for me, it's been a learning experience. I'd like to thank my co-panelists for having actually brought out aspects which we were really, really not aware about. Thank you. Brigadier BN, is up to you.
Thank you, sir. It's my privilege on behalf of the MLCF to express gratitude to you all, the learned panelists, and all our esteemed viewers who attentively heard throughout the session. The role of church by Mr. Sanjay, you have very well summarized, sir. And the effects of memorial politics by General HK have brought in many aspects, especially the battle of hatred, which were generally out of focus whenever in last 8 months we have seen the discussion on Ukraine. We thank General Kakkad for his incisive assessment of two top scenarios, which very well covered, and he backed his discussion with data that highlights the interest. Thank you very much. Today's session, gentlemen, was the 5th in series of the current season, and next in the lineup is scheduled on 6th November. Please do join us, where we will be discussing northeastern parts of the country and its gateway. That will be the focus. Please do join, and thanks again, once again, and goodbye till then.